Right, rook and pawn versus rook, king in front of a rook's pawn. So in these rook and pawn versus rook situations, if you're playing with a rook's pawn, it's very unlikely that there's going to be any winning chances at all. Most of the time it's just going to be a draw, and a very easy draw for the defending side. But there are some ways in which it's won. If your rook is stuck in front of the pawn and the defending king's a long way away, there are some various things that need talking about there, which I'll cover in other videos. But also if your king is stuck in front of the rook's pawn, and this is the important bit, the defending side's king is cut off by 4 files, it has to be 4 or more files, that's pretty extreme, then it's a win. And my view is that we should all just know the winning procedure. It doesn't really matter if the pawn is further back. It's very easy to, just keep the rook, in this case on the e file, cutting off the defending side's king, and you can just, if the black rook was on a1, stop. Let's say our white pawn was on a4, and we've got a black rook behind it. Then to make progress, all you need to do is bring your king to the side, and when you get checked, you can come back in 1 rank further up and then push the pawn behind. Or if the black rook's on the b file, you can simply push the king and then push the pawn up behind it. So it's actually very easy for the king and the pawn to get themselves up to the situation that we can see now. And also, of course, if the black rook ever makes a challenge on the e file and tries to swap rooks, then obviously that's easily won. We just swap rooks and play king b7. It's done. So it's worth knowing the winning procedure, which I'll go through now. But it's also, as the defending side, worth knowing the winning procedure. And what I recommend you do if you're defending this, if you've got time, knowing what's about to be coming, is put your rook on the 3rd rank. That might look a bit confusing as to why you're doing that, but it's because you know that if white now plays this well, you've got a queen versus rook situation coming up, and having your rook on the 3rd rank gives you the best chance to defend that. Okay. So why do we need 4 files? Well, we're going to try and bring the white rook to b8, and it's quite hard. How does the white rook get to b8? You can see that the 2 direct paths are covered, so we kind of have to go all around the houses. A couple of choices actually. You can either go to c2 directly, that does it, but you can also go from e2 to h2. As soon as you relinquish control of the e file in either of these two, by the way, the black king starts coming across, and then rook h8. Now if you're the defending side, I recommend you play king d6 here. It's the trickier move. If black plays king d7, it's going to be a bit easier, and we're not even going to end up in queen versus rook either. So rook b8, it doesn't really matter where the black rook goes. It's being challenged, so it has to move off the b file, and like I say, it doesn't really matter where it goes, because white's next move, if there's only one move to win this, it's king b7. Check, king a6, check again. You have to go to b6 to hold on to the a7 pawn, but after rook b3, the white king sneaks out onto the c5 square. That's why king d6 is a slightly better move, is a trickier move, because you would hold on to the c5 square, and there would be no way for the white king to sneak out. Okay, it has to sneak out the other way, because by coming to d6 rather than d7, you're no longer controlling the c8 square. Excuse me, but that's a trickier exit route for the white king, as we're going to see soon. Like here, what does black do? Comes behind the a pawn, queens, that's gone. So the trickier defensive move is king d6. We'll still see rook b8. Rook moves, doesn't really matter where, to be honest. It's being challenged because it's just going to come back and give a check. This time, without that sneaky out on c5, the white king's going to do a sneaky out over here. But black's not finished with their defensive tries. Rook c3 check, king to b7 would just end up repeating, so it has to be king to d8, and then rook across to h3. If the white king moves, if it goes back to c8, we're going to repeat. If it goes to e8, that's an immediate draw. We'll go rook h8 check, come back to h7, and pick off the a pawn. So the white king can't move. There's no way to block the checkmate. Well, if you're being threatened with checkmate, your king can't move, and you have no way to block it. All you can really do is look for check. So the move gives itself away a little bit here, which is rook b6 check, which doesn't look particularly clever because black can then just come and attack the rook. And as soon as you've done something about that, we can, black can maybe try and get their act together and try and get their rook into the corner, attack the rook. I mean, for example, rook a6 would be a very bad move because black can play rook h8 check, and the king's just going to get checked forever if it comes this way. It has to come out the other way, but as soon as it does that, we've got rook a8. This is coming to attack the rook. It's a draw, so you can't play rook a6. So what do you do here? And I mean, if I was the defending side of this, I would play it on, hoping that white doesn't know the move, because they've got to find it over the board if they don't know it. But it's worth knowing that it's rook c6 check. Really clever move. Black's got a couple of things he could try here, but really the most sensible one is just to take the rook. Notice that if we hadn't moved our rook to the third rank, it would now be on h1 and not h3, and then a8 equals queen would immediately pick it up. I've got a feeling if it was on h2, then the queen picks it up pretty quickly as well. But on h3, it's not so easy. And we'd see queening, and then it's a reasonably favourable position for black to start the defence of queen versus rook, although ultimately it's a flawed defence. This is now just one for white. Good luck with that against Stockfish, by the way. I've practiced it a few times, and I think more often than not I get 50 moved by Stockfish. It's very frustrating. And when I try it the other way around, he sort of checkmates me at 14 moves or something, or fewer. Couple of other sneaky things that black could try here, which are king d5. That's not a problem. We just play rook a6. And if they go the other way with king b5, we just play rook c8. Just be careful that if you get checked here, you've got to come to c7 and not d7, because the next thing is going to be a check and you've got to go and defend that a pawn. That's it. That's the procedure for winning rook and pawn versus rook in the case of a rook's pawn with your king stuck in front of it. The only way it's a win is if the defending side's king is cut off by 4 files. So pretty extreme. And you saw how close that was. Like if in the king d6 line, the white king sneaks out just on the c8 square. In the king d7 line, the white king sneaks out just on the c5 square. It is so close to not being won. So it sort of goes without saying, to be honest, that if there are only 3 files separating, then it's just not a win. So let's skip to this 1966 game. There are only 3 files separating, and yeah, it's just not a win. It's white to play. White does have a losing move here. How about that for a little challenge? If you wanted to pause the video and find white's not too silly looking. I mean, obviously that's a very silly looking move, for example. See if you can spot a move that's not too silly, but obviously loses. So king d3 would lose, of course, because we just get checked. So it's then 4 files separating. But white obviously wasn't stupid enough to do that in this 1966 game, and just started very sensibly checking the black king, disappearing back on the g file. Black pushed the h pawn. White just started a series of checks again, and eventually the black king ended up in front of the h pawn. There's nothing that white can do to stop the king and the pawn sort of shuffling their way down the board. which is what happened. But white just stuck on the G file. Just stick on the G file. And the point is, I mean, black didn't completely finish the shuffle. The only way that the black king can come out is if the rook challenges the white rook on G3. But as long as you're covering the direct route to that, black's going to have to either let you onto the E file by doing this, and then they couldn't even get there because you're going to come and cover the F3 square, or they're going to have to try something similar to the winning procedure, where they disappear off over here and they're going to come round to get to the G3 square. Excuse me. And as soon as they've done that, you bring your king in. So it's similar to the winning procedure with the 4 files cut off, but there's only 3 files, so you're going to get the king in, and the white king's going to sort of, you know, pin the black king to the edge of the board. It's not going to be able to get out. Check, king F1. All right, our rook's being challenged, but then we can just come behind the pawn. In the game, black brought the rook back to G4, and white just stuck on the H pawn. We saw a check, king back to E2. Black king tries to come to G2, rook G8 check. I think they agreed a draw there. You might be wondering, why didn't the black king come out to G3? Again, just check. We just keep checking the black king. There's just not enough space for the black king to get out. And if we see the rooks block, we'd just see a swap and the king's into the corner. It's very hard to win with a rook's pawn. We know that rook and king and pawn versus king is a draw as long as we can get to the F1 square. And having the rooks on hasn't really helped. So yeah, pretty extreme circumstances required. That looks very favourable, doesn't it, at first sight for the black perspective. That the white king is cut off by 3 files, and the black king is already in a great position to support, you know, what black would have been hoping would be this promotion. But it's just a draw. Last but not least, and you could argue, to be honest, that there's nothing new being shown in this game. It's just 4 files separating. This shuffle down the board is pretty easy, and we're going to get that position, and it's going to be a win for black. This is a game from 1986. Black to play. King B4 was played. Rook B8 check. King A3. So if the white rook is hitting the A pawn, we have to do that little zigzag to get our king and pawn down the board. If the white rook's preventing our king from coming out, it's not a problem. We can just move our king first and then the pawn. So in fact, we'll see that now. So we saw both examples there. And white just sort of in the end got bored of trying to stop the black king and pawn going down the... got fed up, I should say, because I'm about to say the word board again. Got fed up with trying to stop the black pawn going down the board, and just settled for the fact that they're going to be ending up in queen versus rook. I reckon they knew what they were doing. I reckon they knew what was coming, because they played rook b6 next. Although weirdly, in a minute, didn't go into queen versus rook. Maybe they just changed their mind and thought, I can't be bothered with queen versus rook today. And then the winning procedure started. So I demonstrated it as the black rook comes around this way to the b1 square. In this game, black just took that route to the b1 square. And yeah, I think white knew what was going on here. King d3 is the trickier move. Rook b1, rook goes, doesn't really matter where it goes because the king has to come to b2. It's the only winning move. Check. King to c1, check. Off to h6 with the checkmate threats. So black has to play rook b3 check and follow it up with rook c3 check. Now this is a bit strange really, because having moved their rook to the 6th rank, or black's 3rd rank, to get the rook to h6, I would have thought it made sense to just go into queen versus rook and, you know, start off in a reasonably favourable setup for that. It's lost, but you know it's a good start to have your rook on h6 and be checked there. But strangely, in this position, white just sort of went for a little trick. It went for king b4. Black played rook c1, and then they resigned. Which is... I mean, I was looking at the possible alternative moves, like, why did they do that? Were they hoping that black just didn't know this rook c1 move or couldn't work it out? Black does have another couple of other tries, one of which is king c1. That's a very clever move. Just leave the rook hanging, so that's still going to lead to queen versus rook. But black could have also played rook c6 here if they'd wanted to. I mean, I wouldn't play either of those moves, and I don't think anyone should. I'm just trying to work out why, after bringing their rook to the third rank, or the sixth rank, as we look at the chessboard, why did white just sort of not bother with the queen versus rook? Maybe they were just had enough. Anyway, that's how you win rook and pawn versus a rook if you've got a rook's pawn and the king is stuck in front of the pawn with the defending side's rook, sort of just keeping you caged into the corner. It's only winnable if there are 4 files cutting off the defending side's king, and yeah, we should just know how it's done.